Awesome. All right,
Well,
perfect.
my name is Kelly Nerick, and I'm the Senior Director of Products and Services at the Small Business Association of Michigan. And this is the third of four webinars that Mavacy has done for our members. Each webinar has a different topic that they focused on. If you happen to miss the first two, we do have them recorded and saved on our website under resources. You can view any previous webinars that we've done. Um, so Mavacy is our approved partner for legal services for our members, and they have many different options for you. Whether you would like to have them on retainer for any sort of legal services that you need. They offer a broad spectrum, including general counsel, employment, human resources, privacy, security, intellectual property, or if you would rather look at a specific service that you are in need of, they do have an a la carte option where maybe you just need help with trademark filing or help with a contractor agreement. You can choose from their menu of services and just pay a one-time fee for that. So I will drop in the chat the link to the landing page if you're interested in learning more. But today the discussion is about succession planning, which Mavacy are experts in. And without further ado, Michael, go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly, and welcome everyone. Looking forward to talking with you guys today about something that's very near and dear to my heart. And the reason is so many of us work so hard as entrepreneurs to build something that has value. And while we usually make a good living while we're doing that, the real value is often when we exit or when we transition out of the business. And a lot of times people don't plan for the exit or for the end, and it can be one of the most important things that doesn't always often get talked about. The other thing I would say is most people don't love to talk about succession planning or estate planning, which I'll touch on some here in this call too, is because it involves a word that starts with a D that we don't like to talk about called dying. And as Americans, we just don't do that like other organizations and civilizations do. But so we don't have to use the D word. I'm going to go ahead and just refer to it as Fiji if I do bring it up again. So what we're talking about is oftentimes how do you transition out of your business, or what do you do with your business if you decide if something happens and you go to Fiji. So that's really what today's conversation is about. And we thought people get so worried in the day to day of what does a document look like? What does my lease look like? I have an employment issue. I have a tax question. I have an IP question. Those things come up all the time. And a lot of times people don't wake up and go, hey, I have a succession planning question. I have an estate planning question. And we wanted to make sure to touch on this because we find it's one of the most important things and one of the things we get asked about most often. And unfortunately, it's usually when it's too late. So with that being said, I want to go ahead and dive into this. So basically today, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about estate and succession planning to secure a business's legacy. You want to be able to ensure a smooth transition, protecting it from uninterrupted disruption. What we do know is once you build a good business with processes and systems, you do want to make sure it keeps going long after you're not involved in the business. Next thing we'll touch on is how do you prepare to have continuity for the next generation? That next generation may be your lineage, your heirs. It may be the next generation could be employees that currently work for you that have grown up in your business. It could be a buyer that comes in and isn't related to you, but transitions you and your management team out, but provides you with liquidity, and they're the next generation of the business. And so really looking at that and how we do that. And the last thing is asking a difficult question is, have you prepared to protect that investment? Have you prepared to create that legacy that goes long beyond your involvement? And if not, what are some things you can be thinking about? What I would say is the team will be monitoring the chat if you have questions. I'll try to zip through this to really leave some time at the end for us to ask questions. I find that the interactive part is usually the best, but I think in this topic, it's worth me spending the first part giving you some background, and then we'll dive into some questions. And I definitely would love to have interaction because I think this is a very interesting topic that bodes well to that situation. So I know we have a lot of listeners on. Thank you everyone for joining. Most importantly, thank you SBAM for our amazing partnership that we have, our ability to do these talks. and our ability to be able to bring value to the small business community of Michigan. It's something that we're near and dear to our hearts, and we're grateful to be able to do. So with that, let's go ahead and jump right in. So I think what I'm going to do a couple of things just to kind of lay the groundwork is when we talk about succession planning is really a strategy for passing leadership to successors. What does that really mean? You have a business. Your business currently operates. There's someone who runs or leads that business. What happens if that leadership, that person is no longer there, is no longer involved? Forget about ownership for a second. How do you ensure that the leadership, the management of the business continues to the next generation or to the next group of people? Without this, a business's future doesn't exist. Without this, the employees, the families you wake up and take care of. One thing I always loved about owning businesses was I knew that every day I got to come make an impact in my team's lives and their families. And when we have businesses, our family is sometimes the extended family, the families of our employees. And making sure you have a continuity program, having the succession plan in place is an important part of it. Because we've all heard about businesses that didn't make it. We've all heard about a matriarch and a patriarch leaving a business and it not making it. We've all heard about a leadership or a manager transitioning out of the business, maybe going to Fiji, unfortunately, and the business not making it. And a lot of times that has to do with because there wasn't the planning, there wasn't a strategy in place that started well before it was needed to make sure that succession could occur. And so that's why this topic is so important. Things that I'll often get brought up in conversations that get asked to me or I ask is, who are you think is going to take over your business? And a lot of times they don't have anyone. They haven't even thought about that. The response they get is, well, I haven't thought about that. Or, you know what, I was just hoping one of my employees would. Or, you know what, oh, my kids will. Well, it's unfortunate, but what if your kids don't want to do what you did? What if they don't have the same passion? Now, if you're lucky enough to get to work in the business with your family, that's a blessing. But a lot of people's children don't want to. And I can't tell you how many second generation, sometimes third generation, the grandkids, aren't interested in the business or let the businesses fail in the way that mom or grandma and grandpa did it. And so that's something that's so important is really looking at who is properly positioned to take over the business. The second part is this is a transaction. That doesn't happen in one day. It usually doesn't happen in 1 week. It usually doesn't happen in 1 month. It can be years when done properly. So how will that succession be managed? How will that transition be managed? What's going to go into that process to make that happen? And the next thing is, what is the timeline? I just sat with a business owner last month who said, oh, I'd like to sell the business next month. And I started asking kind of questions that would be on a due diligence list, and they don't have anything in order. And I said, well, how long is it going to take you? And they said a few months. And I said, are you sure? Because I happen to know that you usually can't compile all this in a few months. It usually takes 6 to 12 months. But they were expecting to be out of their business in the next couple of months. And what they found was that it could take them a year, if not 18 months. And I bring that up because succession planning is something that you start well before. For a lot of the clients I work with, they aren't even close to being ready to have a succession. They're getting started now, though, because they want to be prepared. I always have a joke that I always say, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. Those businesses get real lucky because someone took the time to be prepared. And so they want to be prepared so the next generation can be lucky. But the other thing is that we never know when the unexpected is going to happen. And unfortunately, we hear too many times about someone going to Fiji, or it's not even that catastrophic, but it could just be that there's a change in the economy. There's a change in regulations. There could be a thing like a pandemic that we never thought about happening. There's external factors that affect our business that we have to be thinking about. So making sure we put a timeline in place and get started, it's never too early to get started with this. So that's what succession planning is, why it's important, and some of the key questions to be asking. And when you think about succession plans, there's different types of succession plans. So think about a small business. We got a small business, and that small business, it may be that you pass it on to a family member, right? And we'll talk about what that looks like. And I want to pause for a second and just say, I'm keeping this at a high level and talking about the concepts, the strategies. I'm not going to get into the tactics or maybe the detailed numbers because each situation is a little different. Someone may have 2 kids, someone may have 6 kids, someone may have stepkids, someone may have adopted someone may have grandkids, someone may not have grandkids, someone may have sisters or brothers, some people may not have siblings. And all that plays into how you would do family succession planning. The employee succession planning, sometimes you'll hear the word ESOP, ESOP. So an ESOP, think of it the simplest way, and this is very complex, but I thought I'd at least bring it up, is selling to your employees. We've done quite a few of those. That's a very interesting way to transition and have a succession out of the business. Something I'm more than happy to talk about. If you have enough business and it's of the right size, you usually need a high 7, if not 8-figure business for an ESOP to make a lot of sense, but can be a very good strategy for doing succession planning. So another one is an external sale. We all hear about that. I'm sure we've all been to, buy sell biz or web closers or some other broker dealer business. They're out there, excuse me, and they will often be a business broker. There'll be people who are able to connect people to the business. I think of this a lot like being able to sell businesses an asset. People sell boats, people sell planes, people sell pieces of real estate. Same type of thing is that this is a third party person who's in the business of representing a buyer or a seller to make a connection between the two parties such that they're able to do a transaction of the business for the buyer and a seller. So the next one would be a management buyout. Slightly different than the family or the employee. Basically, think of it, you're selling it directly to your management. Not necessarily the entire employee base, but your key 2 or 3 people, maybe your key 5 people that run your business day to day, if you're big enough to have that. So those are just 4 really quick kind of high level ways that you could do succession planning and to think about when you're putting it together. So I think that when you think about a succession plan, there's 5 things that we want to point out is identifying who is the right person. Because more than likely there's more than one person, but who is the right person for the business? Sometimes the strategic is the only one who's going to take it into the next generation. Sometimes only a family member would love it the way you did and could really make it work the way that you guys did. Other times it's going to require your employees to stay in or your management to stay in. The only way to do that is to keep them involved. Another thing is you got to train. Training and developing your successors is the most important part. I can't tell you how many businesses I've heard of or been involved with where we go through a succession plan to a family member, to a strategic buyer, to a management team, and we do a transaction. Money's actually changed hands. The business is quote unquote sold or transitioned and succession is taking place. And a year, 3 year, 5 years later, the business ain't what it was supposed to be. They didn't do the job they were supposed to be, and now they couldn't finish making the seller financing payments, or the business went under, or they couldn't make it, or someone got fired. And it really comes back to the training and development necessary for that success. And so really investing the time into that, it's not as much a money thing, but it's more of time usually. And a lot of times the seller or the person who's the successor to the successee isn't putting in the resources necessary to do the right training and development. Because you didn't build this business overnight. Why would you think that someone could step in the shoes to start running it overnight? If you didn't hear anything else I said, that's probably one of the most important things is you got to invest in your people, especially if it's for your succession. I think making sure you understand what you want your timeline to be. Is it something you want to do tomorrow? Is it something you want to do in a month? Is it something you want to do in a year? Is it something you're just starting to plan and you're going to be doing in 10 years? I work with some businesses and they'll be 5 to 10 years out. I worked with someone, one of the best I heard conversations I ever had is they were starting a business. And they started talking of this, and we got a little bit in the weeds. But I said, I love that you're asking the question. In a year, let's talk about this. But they were already planning for their exit, which I love that part of them having that. Another key component is the valuation. We all know that our baby is usually more beautiful than anyone else thinks it will be, and that's okay. But really understanding the true value of your business is so important. I will tell you that a lot of these succession plans take twice as long because the first half is just spent getting the person that's getting out of the business or selling the business to get a grasp of what it's really worth. And so a lot of people just think what it's worth a lot because it's made them a lot of money, or they've heard so-and-so made a bunch of money, or social media has ruined it for people because everyone thinks they have a unicorn, but that's not the case here. And so really understanding your value, getting a trusted professional, and it doesn't have to cost a lot of money to get that done, to find out what multiples are in your industry. We have a resource we help a lot of time. There's a lot of companies that can come in and do a evaluation, but having this done sporadically helps for a lot of reasons. One of the least we think about is just having the right insurance in place for the business. But especially when it comes time to finding a side in a succession, if you've been having these conversations, it's not as awkward a conversation, and we all know what it's worth. So that's an important part. The last part would be how you're going to fund it, because more than likely when you're transitioning out, someone is going to be leaving. I'm going to call that the seller, and they're going to be leaving with some kind of money, whether it be on closing day or of a period thereafter. So making sure there's the right documents in place, the right mechanics in place. That can be having the right buy-sell agreements in place. It could be having the right purchase agreements in place. It could be having the right key man or key woman life insurance in place. It could have having SBA bank financing in place. It could have private lender financing in place. It could have seller financing in place. But there's going to be a financial transaction, and starting to plan for that's important because that definitely doesn't happen overnight. So those are some key components to think about when you're thinking about succession planning. And so, we really started at what is succession planning? Why is it important to be thinking about it? Some things to be asking yourself. We talked about the types of succession planning, and then we talked about some of the key components that go into succession planning. So the next part, which is an adjacent or a sister conversation, is estate planning. And so when you think about this, succession planning is what you're actually going to do with the business. What are the corporate documents going to say? What is the corporate governance going to be when you transition out of a business? That's the true business. We all have an entity we filed with the state, maybe the state of Michigan. We all have an EIN. We all file taxes. That's the business itself. Succession planning is about the business itself. Estate planning isn't about that man or woman, that group of people that own the business. You own a business that's an asset. That asset is most likely in your personal name or in an LLC, but ultimately it's going to be in what's called your estate. And so have you prepared to transfer that asset upon death or incapacitation? If you do go to Fiji, what happens to your estate? Totally separate question from what happens to your business, but they're related because a lot of times you are your business and the business is you. So have you taken the time to do your estate planning? And we're going to talk about, and you're going to hear some of these names before, but I'm not talking about just getting the basics in place. I'm about making sure, have you done the right things to use estate planning and estate planning documents to protect your actual business and your assets, the real estate you own, the different things you have going on? And why is this important? Well, one thing is it reduces estate tax. I often tell people that if you go to Fiji, your estate can be taxed at 40%. Think about giving almost 50% of what your business is worth away. Now, I'm not against, doing good and giving to charity or even paying taxes. But if you worked your whole life and now it's time to transition and you have a succession plan in place, and part of that succession plan is some capital comes your way, whatever that amount may be. Upon you going to Fiji, do you want almost half of that to go to someone other than your family? That's why estate planning can be super important. The other thing, what people don't realize, is this thing called probate. So when someone no longer is with us and they go to Fiji, their estate has to be put in a probate. If you do estate planning, it avoids probate. It also gives protection of your assets for your heirs when done properly. That's a little more complex, but it's an important part of that. And it ensures the business is going to be able to continue with minimum disruption. Because if I'm able to line up, if we can help someone put together a succession plan that ties in their estate plan and everyone's on the same page, and most importantly, the documents all mirror that, it goes much easier. Because we're not talking about giving away mom or dad's boat. We're not talking about giving away a piece of jewelry. We're talking about a going concern that has people involved. And now all of a sudden, you got the vice president who was running the business for mom or dad saying, well, they promised me that I was going to do this, this, and this. And children saying, well, they promised me this, this, and this. And now we have an argument over the business. When the succession plan is laid out and the estate plan is in order, there's congruity among that and all the documents match, and it's easier to talk through it. So that's why estate planning is so important and what it is. Now, you've probably heard of a lot of these items when I'm about to say: wills, trusts, powers of attorney, healthcare directives, beneficiary designations. Again, these are the things that impact the individual people who make up the business. And it's just as important for the owners to have it as the managers and the key employees. What happens is the will outlines the wishes of the assets. What's going to happen with the assets while you're alive and how they're distributed. What happens with the trust is it provides control of how the assets are distributed and managed. So when you're no longer here, the will is going to say what happens to them. What happens is the trust is what allows you to provide the control over the assets. The power of attorney assigns someone the control in a very limited situation. They don't take over your life to make decisions in case of death or incapacitation. And so If you are no longer assigned mind and body, someone has to continue to make choices for you, legal, financial, medical, all different areas of your life, and you can limit it. Susie only gets this responsibility in this situation. Bobby only gets this situation, this responsibility. Cindy only gets this responsibility in this situation. You can limit those, but you have to have those powers of attorney because they're going to be necessary. Again, this is about making the transition seamless and easy for everyone involved. The other side of it is the healthcare directives. This ensures medical preferences are followed. If you have a specific thing you want handled, if you are terminally ill or you're incapacitated, if it's not in there, it can create an argument amongst your loved ones. And so, again, it's not about any one document or one planning conversation. This is a holistic approach. If we can take the succession planning with the estate plan and they all mirror up, that makes things go a lot smoother. The last thing is beneficiary designation. It's the asset transfer upon death and how it's going to go, what's going to happen, where it's going to move, and all those things that are actually going to happen with the actual assets and how the beneficiaries are impacted. The beneficiaries are typically those people who receive the proceeds from the trust. So those are some of the essentials of estate planning. I think the other side of this, and in estate planning, there's really 5 levels. Most people say, "Oh, do you have a will and a trust?" That's level 1. This is the second thing I'm going to say. That if you don't remember anything else, remember this: please go out and get an estate plan. Everyone should have one. It's the best thing you do, not only for yourself, for your spouse, or for your heirs. It just makes everything a lot easier if you do end up going to Fiji. So getting the most basic, just a will and a trust, is something that's important. It's something that we have on our a la carte menu. I think I alluded to when Kelly was introducing us. But ultimately, the idea around that is just making sure you have the basics in place. These things, I'm just giving you a flavor, are some more sophisticated things. If you already have all these, you're probably on the right track. If you're like, what alphabet did Michael just speak? And you do have a successful business, it's worth us talking for sure. Thinking about gifting strategies. This is one way that we're able to limit or reduce income and estate tax value and ultimately reduce the estate taxes. Family limited partnerships protect access and reduce taxes. Irrevocable life insurance trusts remove life insurance from the taxable estate, put them outside the taxable estate, become an asset that can help with tax liabilities and other strategic tax planning measures. And the last one is a grantor retained annuity trust. It's called a GRAT. That's a way to transfer appreciation to heirs with minimal taxes. Again, these are all what I would say more sophisticated tax strategies that should be used in business as people start to accumulate 7, 8, and 9 figures of wealth. So that's what these are for. And they're good things to have in the place. But again, I reiterate, if you don't have a basic estate plan and will and a trust, please get that done. If you have a business that's running and you feel is thriving, we should be talking about doing some estate planning that aligns with your succession planning. And if you're truly creating wealth and you have real estate and your business is moving along, you have multiple employees and you're starting to create some wealth, you really want to start thinking about your estate planning from a tax efficiency standpoint. So that's what this is all about. I think another thing to point out, so we touched about succession plan, we talked about estate plans and really talking about what it is, why it's important, and some things to think about. I want to just point out a few other things to be thinking about, and I'm using buzzwords just so you start thinking about them. A lot of times a business has partners or a business has other people involved, and it's different than having a partnership agreement or an operating agreement. A buy-sell agreement may be included in those, but the buy-sell agreement is a specific language, the clauses, or it's usually, I like to make it a separate document. Because if everything goes wrong in the operating agreement, the partnership agreement, or the stockholder agreement, but there is buy-sell agreements in place between the partners, between the founders, this makes things a lot easier. This is a legally binding agreement that manages ownership changes. So that's something that's super, super important to have between 2 partners who start a business, regardless of what the structure looks like. Them understanding that's important. It usually has, and we like to put in our operating agreements, but usually triggering events such as death, disability, retirement are important things. And the reason for that is that if someone goes to Fiji and they were an integral part of the business and you have to replace them, do you want to be dealing with their spouse or their heirs and argue with them? Or do you want it crystal clear on what happens to the business so you can either take the business and do what you need to do with it, or bring in the right partner to move it forward. The same thing with disability. It's nothing, it's an awful and traumatic, and I have a lot of empathy for the situation, but the business still must go on. The business has to continue to operate. And sometimes what's best for someone who has passed, who has a disability or does retire, is to make sure the procedures are in place to let the right person run the business moving forward. So buy-sell agreement helps deal with those triggering events. And there's different things you can have in place: a cross purchase, an entity purchase, a hybrid, but just really figuring out the mechanics, the belts and suspenders, they like to call it. So a lot of times what happens if someone says, hey, I need it, we take the time to talk with them, to answer questions, to really help them figure out what they need. And then based on that conversation, we're then able to really help put in these types of mechanics, as we call them, to make sure they're protected and things move along smoothly the way they need to and the way they want to. And I think the other part we talked about before is funding the agreement, really making sure a lot of times with buy-sell agreements, we'll have both partners get a life insurance policy because the family or they don't have the money to go towards the purchase. But if someone were to have death, disability, retirement, and it was a triggering event that invoked the buy-sell agreement, there's a life insurance policy in place that ultimately can be used to for the proceeds for the funding of the transaction. So that's why buy-sell agreements are important. Again, they are a tool. They're not necessary depending on how you structure their parts or the structure of the business. If there's only one owner that owns 100%, it's not really a buy-sell agreement. It isn't really applicable. But that's just another tool that we always like to at least touch on in these conversations. I think another thing is just, one thing is people don't always love to talk about the things that I just brought up here. But any good transition has the following features to it. There's clear communication with stakeholders. The stakeholders can be the spouses of the owners, it can be the spouse of the owner. Clear communication has some communication with the children or the heirs of the owner. Clear communication happens with the leadership team, the management team. If I'm no longer here for whatever reason, here's what I want. And when you see businesses that are seamlessly ran after the departure of an executive, a leader, or a manager, it's because behind closed doors, they had these conversations. I'm not even calling them difficult because they're not difficult. We just don't like to talk about them. And like I said, it's a stigma in our society to talk about some of these things. But that clear communication with key stakeholders is so important, even down to your banker. Once you figured out your succession plan and your estate plan, how great would it be if you already had the bank financing lined up? If you've been with your banker for 10 or 20 years and you're not leaving them, you should probably already have it lined up that, hey, if something happens to me and they walk in the door, I've already told them to talk to you. And if you don't give them a loan, they're leaving. How much different is that for your heirs if you have that in place? Which leads to the next one. If your team, your transition team, your lawyers, your accountant, your financial planners, your bankers all know that, that's an important part. A lot of times having your lawyer, your CPA part of the succession plan, having them part of the estate planning is an important part because that team helps make it possible. If you go to Fiji, your spouse or your children know they can call the lawyer and the CPA and get in the room and figure things out. And during that difficult time, you have people who will be emotional because they loved you, but they're clear-headed professionals who can help guide you, your family, your friends, and the company through this difficult time with success. That is so important. If I had to say there's a third takeaway, that's probably a third takeaway of having your team around you that's outside the business. Who are those professionals that are going to be there for you? Again, when you talk about when's the right time to start planning, you should have those people today. I don't care if you don't plan on selling for 2 decades from now. Having that team with you to grow with you is so important. And really having the conversation with your family, your employees, and your successors, and how you have it is delicate and important. I would not walk in tomorrow or walk into lunch after this and say, I just sat through the most amazing webinar and met the smartest attorney I've ever met, joking aside, and say, I need to talk to you about my estate planning and succession planning, and you're the next person. Before you go do that quick start type action, you probably want to sit down with your advisors, maybe have a free introductory call with us, get a consultation and talk through what your options are before you run and talk to them. So please don't run and talk to them tomorrow. Let's have a conversation first, but you should have a conversation. You should engage them. I got to tell you, some of the biggest arguments I've had with my clients around them not talking to their employees or their children about their succession or estate planning. Some of the smoothest businesses I've had that have been the most successful, we've been talking about it every month since I've worked with them. And I think the other part is this is not a one and done. This is not transaction. It's a relationship, which is one of our core values is we focus on the relationship with our clients because this is a plan that we need to regularly review and update the plan. This is a key important part of the business. And so making sure we regularly review and we update the plan, update the value, all those things are part of it that should be done if you truly want a smooth transition. Now listen, you don't have to do anything I just said on those 4 points. It's not important. Just be prepared that the transition's not going to be smooth. Whether you're alive or not, those people that have to deal with this after you is going to be a mess, complicated, and cost them a ton of money. And so to avoid that and make it smooth, invest in these 4 things, please. So that's preparing for a smooth transition. And so I think some common things that we often see as mistakes, and unfortunately, mistakes are when they're usually more complicated and more expensive, is that there's delays in the planning process. And I'll just give an interesting anecdote. We do a decent amount of estate planning, and I always tell people to do the estate plan. I'm going to ask you a lot of challenging and difficult questions someone may not have asked you before because we usually don't talk about this. And I can do this 1 of 2 ways. I can give you a questionnaire that you can take home and do on your own, or I can do a phone call or a Zoom or come meet you in person and we can talk through it and you can answer them. I say a lot of times people like to take the first one and it usually comes with a nice coffee or a libation and they sit with their significant other or they sit with someone they trust and they answer the questions. Now I can tell you to go through this process usually takes 90 minutes to 120 minutes. In less than 5% of all people are able to turn the documents around or have the meeting in a week or 2. Usually it's months or years to get through this process. I've been doing this pretty actively for a decade, and I have one client a decade later still doesn't have it done, unfortunately. I would say to you that over my 2 decades of working with entrepreneurs, them worrying about getting their corporate governance, their succession planning, and their estate planning in order always falls at the bottom for a couple of reasons. One, they don't want to deal with it because who wants to deal with it? A lot of times they're embarrassed to air their dirty laundry. A lot of times they don't want to spend the money because we're an entrepreneur and we want to spend our money. We're a small business. We want to spend our money in our business, not on things like this. And the other part is they want to think about it. Someone else can deal with it or worry about it. Another thing is that document agreements in writing. And so, there'll be a back of a napkin or someone talked about it or someone talked about it on their deathbed, but having these agreements documented, having them written down, I'm going to go down a rabbit hole real quick and say, let's say you do take the time to do this. Something to think about is if you do own things in trust, and this is just a total side anecdote, do not give away your trust documents. They are not public. So if someone asks you or needs to see them, first you should talk to your lawyer of what you should give them. Second of all, this thing called a certificate of trust. It's a great tool to use when dealing with banks, especially. No one needs to see your full trust documents, even if they tell you they need to. And I'm more than happy to help talk to them on your behalf if they tell you that. But having the documents in writing, going back to the point, is a common mistake. Because a lot of times they'll sign a document, they won't do anything with them. They won't fund the trust, they won't do anything. Making sure all the documents are in writing and everything is signed. It's one thing to say, I'm going to do all these things and set this trust. Another thing to take that piece of property and actually change the deed. Making sure all the documents are signed and all the agreements are in writing is important. Also, a lot of this I do with taxes, and we don't like to do it. That's why there are extensions, because people wait to deal with their taxes. But this is something you want to make sure you talk about and think through. It's something you want to make sure you're talking to advisors. There's CPAs, and then there's tax attorneys. And there's estate tax attorneys, and there's business attorneys, there's business tax attorneys. Based on your business, you want to get all the right people. What I always tell people is I'm a generalist in a world of specialists. People come to me, people come to Mavacy, people come to our team because we're a team of outside general counsels. We help with your problems. We happen to specialize in a few areas, especially small business. So when you come to us, we're going to bring the right people to the table. Whether we can do it or we bring someone in, we're going to bring in the right people to be able to help you. Oftentimes that is a tax professional. We're either working with your CPA or we're bringing in a tax attorney or we're bringing an estate tax professional to make sure that they're bringing in their 2 cents and they're advising you on your particular nuanced situation. Just because you spread it on the internet, just because you saw a video on TikTok, just because you saw someone on Instagram say it was possible, don't trust it. while they may be alluding to something that is a very viable strategy, I can tell you from firsthand experience, often they give you the tip of the iceberg and they don't give you the whole iceberg. They do not give you all the ingredients. They just give you the first ingredient. It's important you understand everything that goes into the tax implications associated with the strategy. Other thing is, you can do most of what I've just said online through a service. You could do it through some templates. It's not going to get you the results you want. You spent your career, you spent how many years building your business? Why would you let something this important be done by a computer? This is something that you want a relationship, because if nothing else, the robot, the computer, the internet is not going to be able to engage with your key stakeholders. It's not going to be able to talk with and comfort your spouse or your heirs. There's not going to be someone there to help navigate the process afterwards. All you did was save a few bucks. And while I understand we're all on a budget, we have limited resources, this is typically not an area where if you are going to commit to it, you want to take the least expensive option. Because having a professional advisor who really understands this, not just the estate planning side, but the business side, is so important. And I would say it's one of the things that my team and I are uniquely positioned about, because a lot of people can do estate work. A lot of people can be corporate attorneys. Very few people have their foot in both camps and can marry the two of them. And the last part is people don't update their plan. They did it when they first started, and then all of a sudden they have 3 kids and they never updated it. Or one of the spouses goes to Fiji, or they sell their business and now they don't own a business anymore, and they own a bunch of multi-unit real estate, and they haven't updated the plan, and that affects things in the future. So as we wrap this up and kind of turn it over to ask some questions, is I would say definitely find a time to consult with professionals. They're attorneys, they're CPAs, they're accountants, they're financial advisors, and it's a team. The challenging part is you're going to find I have a financial advisor I love. I kind of like my CPA and I don't have a lawyer. And now you got to get them all to play along nicely. I will tell you often that everyone's going to have slightly different agendas. And so making sure you get a team and get a team that plays well together is an important part. Because at the end of the day, there can be a lot of good intentions with what they want to do from a tax or a financial standpoint. You have to make sure the documents match it. So all parties have to know what the other is doing, and they all have to be playing together. With my great clients, not good clients, my great clients, once a month or once a quarter, I'm on the phone with their financial advisor and with their accountant. And we're talking regularly about their business, their finances, their taxes, and their estate planning. Making sure you have the right documentation you're communicating, over communicating. Were they drafted? Were they reviewed? And do people know what's going on? Do the key stakeholders of the family know what's going on? And taking time to regular update this. Life changes, life happens, businesses grow, laws change. Are you taking time to update the documents? So with that, to land the plane, I want to thank everyone for taking the time so we could talk through this and talk through estate planning and really talk a little bit more about your succession planning and how those two really tie together. Again, I'd love to open this up for some questions if we have any from the audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, you can just unmute yourself. I also dropped in the chat the link from our website if you'd like to submit an inquiry form. And of course, Michael's contact information is there on the screen for you.
Well, Kelly, if we don't have any questions, I'll probably just take a few minutes to things that I've gotten asked that I've found kind of interesting over the years. One thing that I get asked about is who should be my trustee, and the natural inclination is to make your spouse or your oldest or smartest, and I'll never acknowledge the second, but parents will often pick one of their children for some reason, or different children for different reasons. And while that makes natural sense because they're people you trust, often who's going to have the best interest for the business is someone who's qualified to make business decisions. If you have a business to run and your spouse or your children have never run the business, you may want to put a co-trustee or someone else in as a trustee to help with that, and who should be the trustee. So identifying a trustee and who makes the most sense is often an important thing that gets overlooked and people don't always like to talk about. So that's one question I also will get asked. How long it takes is another question I get asked. And like I shared with you, getting the answers back and getting the intentions of the business of what they want to do with their business or with their estate takes the longest. Once we have that, the documentation takes weeks or months, depending on what it is. The more complex ones, I will tell you, for very complex, 8 to 9 figure estates or businesses, it's usually an 18 to 24 month process because there's a lot of moving pieces that happen. When you're talking about 7 to 8 figure businesses, it's anywhere from 6 to 18 months, depending on what you're doing. But that's how long it typically takes. Just the basic estate plan, we've turned them around in a few weeks, especially if someone's going out of the country on vacation. In an emergency, I've done them on the 28th of December because year end was coming. And that was done for tax reasons. So can we get them done? Yes. It just really depends on really knowing what's the intention, and then we can plan accordingly. I'd say a third question that I will get asked is, what should I put into my estate? I'm probably not going to give the details. But I'd say in general, we've published on our website before on a blog, different assets that are usually in your estate or ones you don't want to put in your estate. So should I put my car in my estate? Should I put my home that has a mortgage in my estate? Those are questions we'll often get asked. And it really depends on the asset, but there is kind of some general rules that you want to follow to what you name in your asset. What you name into your estate is another one. So there's a couple really kind of regular questions. I don't know. I'll pause there. Anything from any of the audience or the participants?
Michael, there was a question that came through the Q&A. It says, I already have a trust created, but question whether we chose the right law firm. How easy or hard is it to transfer previously created documents to a new firm?
So that's a great question. And, one thing we always say as the official legal partner of SBAM is you don't have to use us. And if you want to use us and you end up wanting to go to someone else, you can do that. Because someone drafted documents from you, or they represented you in a lawsuit, or one time reviewed a contract for you, you were their client for that specific engagement. You can really move to anyone you want to. And I even tell clients sometimes when I'm no longer the right fit or there isn't a fit there, you don't have to stay with them. If you have the documents, you can show them to another attorney. In fact, a lot of times when I work with a new client, they say, oh, I already have an estate plan in place. I go, great, can you get me the documents? A lot of times they hand me some really fancy binder that has it all in there. I ask them if they have it digitally. In this day and age, most law firms have converted everything to digital. There's a digital version of the documents, but you can show those documents to anyone you're interested in having their feedback on. And usually, like I said, that first consultation is free, or at least with the way we operate. But you're able to take those documents and have anyone work on them. That being said, a lot of times the documents will have that law firm's information of it, and you can change that if you do move to a new law firm. So that's a great question, because I think there's a lot of myths about, like, once you hire a CPA or a lawyer, you're stuck with them for life. And I think there's a trust factor that creates some of that, but you're really free to move to someone else. And I often see that as people, their life changes, their business change, so do their needs around a law firm, and specifically their legal and financial and CPA guidance change. And I can't tell you how many times I've been on both sides. Well, I've mainly been on the buy side of this, where I'm representing the buyer who's going to buy the business, and the business is still represented by the local attorney who, they met at Rotary 20 years ago. And there's nothing wrong with that. Just now you're selling a $20 million business, or now you're dealing with a 7-figure transaction or estate, and that person maybe doesn't have the experience dealing with that, and they sometimes leave money on the table. They sometimes miss important clauses. And so it really is important to make sure you have the right professionals surrounding you as part of the process. But to answer that question, it's really anyone can move at any time. You control your file, you control your documents. If they push back otherwise, give us a call and we'll help you with that at no charge.
Thank you.
Yep.
Are there any other questions? Please feel free chat, Q&A, or you can unmute and speak your question.
Kelly, one other thing I'll say, drift a little bit while we're seeing if there's any more questions, is we've worked in collaboration with SBAM, and we're really looking to put on not just these types of conversations. You'll also see that we have articles in the magazine. You'll also see that we're publishing articles on the website around these and other topics to really provide a complementary resource to the members of SBAM. And we also have other programming that's exclusive for the members of SBAM. And so we really are here looking to provide a legal resource. We found through some of our surveys that there is a huge need when small businesses are asked where they need some of the most help. One of them happens to be around legal, and we realize that. And having been and still being and having been multiple times a small business owner, I know how important resources are. And so knowing that we are one of you, we want to be able to contribute that. And it's one thing that's really important to us. So check it out. Check out what we're doing. And we do have a lot of resources and tools out there for you. And we're continuing to add to them.
Kelly, you have your hand raised.
Yes. I'm just wondering, Michael, if you or how somebody would connect with you to potentially be not a strategic partner, but just have an informal relationship and share how I help some clients in this space and whether or not, we could collaborate on anything. I'm absolutely not legal, have no desire to be legal, but more of the life coaching and some of that around this transition.
Awesome. Well, Kelly, thank you for being bold and sharing that. We'd love to talk to you. If you just shoot an email, love to have a call, because as I alluded to, it's a team effort. This is not a one man or one woman show. And the succession plans that go the best, the estate plans that go the best, that go the smoothest, they have multiple professionals around them guiding different areas, and everyone works together in a team. And that's why it's so important not to start the day before or the day after PG, but to start months, if not years in advance. It gives people time to work together and collaborate.
Wonderful. Well, I will be contacting you. Thank you.
Thanks,
Looking forward
Kelly.
to talking with you. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, well, as I mentioned, Mavacy is an approved partner. And so all of our premium, VIP, and elite level members receive savings on their legal services. They also offer a free Ask an Expert, which is an online service. If you're logged in as a premium or higher member, you can submit any type of legal question to their team and they will respond. In my experience, the years we've been working with their team, it's never just a quick, short answer. They really take the time to learn and understand what you're dealing with and give you trusted expert advice. If you're not yet a premium or higher member, like maybe you're just a starter member or at the basic level, and you still would like to receive that free consultation with the Mavacy team, please feel free to fill out that inquiry form or reach out to Michael directly. They'll be happy to explain everything to you, what the cost would be if you were to upgrade your membership versus just direct with them. They are here to help our members in any way possible. And I have personally used their team for my estate planning, and I couldn't have been happier with the way that they treated me. So I'll give my own personal testimony there.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, we will wrap it up. Thank you again for joining us today, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.